Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at mikemalatesta.com. My guest today is Shawn Faessler. Shawn has an awesome story. He quit his job in his mid-40s to direct his entire focus to 3 priorities: kids, volunteering, and personal development. Shawn has been a Boy Scout leader at the highest level and an advocate to help people like him get access to prosthetics. He's climbed mountains, explored Antarctica, run marathons, all after acquiring his own prosthetic, after losing part of his leg in an accident. Shawn is an exceptionally giving human. He is not disabled. He is empowered. Here we go. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be here, Mike.
Yeah, I'm glad we got introduced by Chad Bolliger, I think. Pretty sure. And Chad, mutual connection of Shawn and I's. He's a Northwestern Mutual Life agent that I don't think either one of us work with, but we've connected and networked with Chad. I know I have. He's a really, really good guy, just like a really genuine guy who gets out and meets a lot of people, and every so often he, sends me an email that says, "Hey, I know this person, and I think they'd be a good person for you to meet. Not, maybe for the podcast, maybe for something else." And in this case, he put Shawn and I together, and we had a little conversation. And I think you're going to be really happy with what you learned from Shawn today. So, Shawn, sorry, I start every podcast with the same simple question: how did it happen for you?
Right. So for me, how did it happen was I became very intentional about what I want my life to be. And so then the question is, well, what is the it? So what happened is when I was in my mid-40s, I decided to take a career break or employment break or personal leave. I basically quit my job and quit working to work on other things. And just to give you a little bit of context, I was in the middle of my career. I had just celebrated my 20th service anniversary with General Electric, and I was looking at what's next in my career. And it wasn't just like, what's the next job? It's what are the next 2 jobs? Where am I going? And based on where I was in my life, I'm looking at my time horizon and thinking, well, do I just work for another 20 years at the same company? Do I want to try something different? When do I retire? Do I still retire early at 60 like I had hoped? And the more I reflected on this, the more I asked some bigger and bigger questions like, what is life going to be like at 60 and 65? And thinking of my family members and loved ones, where would they be? Some won't be alive. Some may have passed away from cancer. I had 3 relatives that passed away at cancer at 50. And then I asked the question, okay, if I'm 60, 65, retired, what the heck am I going to do? Right? I may lose some of my mobility. Kids are going to be out of the house. Who knows how mobile my parents will be? Grandmothers may have passed away. So after a lot of reflection, I decided I'm ready to quit working to focus on 3 other priorities. And really what those priorities are is, first of all, it was my kids. The second priority was volunteering. And the third priority was personal development. Okay,
so let me just paint the picture here. I think if I make sure I got it right. So you've got a a successful career, 21 years with GE Healthcare, and as I look through your resume, it's seems like it's a couple years at this, then a promotion, couple years at this, then a promotion. You get into your 40s and you start thinking about, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Was there something about the company's approach to you that changed or anything, Shawn? Or was it just this sort of, maybe people would refer to that as a midlife crisis, but in your 40s, that's hopefully too young to be midlife. But was there some? Yeah. What were the dynamics of what was going on in your head or your life or whatever? Besides what you mentioned about, would I be here for? Because even most people aren't thinking about retiring at well, maybe they're thinking about retiring at 60, but they don't really see that as a possibility, or a lot of folks don't. And then there's other people like me who's like, why would I ever retire? I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this and then do that. So I'm interested in your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wish I had an easy answer for that. There's a lot of factors that really contribute to this. So I'll really focus on the key things that were really the major decision points. First of all, when I turned 40, I started to sense the reality of my own mortality. I had known 3 relatives that had passed away from cancer at 50. So here I am at 40 thinking, I could have another 50 years left. I could have another 10 years left. I could have another life-threatening injury like I had several years prior, and that would be it. And so that was really one of the things that really got my mind thinking about what I want my life to be. And then when I reached the mid-year point in my career, things were actually going pretty well. I had a pretty strong start to my career. About 5 to 7 years in, I had some career struggles and really needed some personal growth to get to that next level. But when I got my last job at GE, things were great. It was a very easy transition, a much bigger role. I did well in the role, enjoyed it, found it successful. But got kind of bored with it. I'm thinking, well, I should do something just a little bit more exciting. And what else is there? And then, just thinking about retiring, I looked at people that had retired and they spend years, 30, 40 years focusing on retirement. And then they go off and they retire, they buy a boat, they travel. And some of them came back a year later and started working for GE as a contractor. And I'm thinking, well, am I going to do that? Am I going to work for 40 years for this big retirement and then come back a year later and continue to work just because I'm bored or nothing else to do?
Yeah.
So part of it was trying to figure out, how can I take advantage of the time that I have with my kids right now while they're still in high school? At the time, my oldest was 16. And also trying to figure out, what other passions do I have? What other things do I want to do before my life ends or I'm on my deathbed? And so those are really the things that precipitated this decision.
And those 3 priorities that you mentioned, your kids, volunteering, and personal development, did you have those constructed or idealized prior to making the decision, or did those come afterwards?
Those were really part of the decision, and those were forming before the decision. So, it may sound like I just one day walked into work and said I quit. It couldn't be further from the truth, especially for anyone that knows me. I really started formulating this idea probably about 7 or 8 months before I actually left, and started formulating, what am I going to do? I talked to someone about this just to get some advice of does this even make sense to do this? And her response was, well, first of all, you're smiling when you talk about this, so this is probably a good thing. And her other thing that she said was, it sounds like you're going to something, you're not running away from something. So it was important to me to validate that I'm not trying to leave something that's bad. I'm trying to move to something that's good. I really developed these priorities about 4 to 5 months in. I actually told my manager about this 4 months before I actually quit my job. So I had plenty of time to transition to this new phase of my life.
And how about your family? How were they feeling about this thought or decision of yours? Was it a family discussion? I'm curious how you navigated it from that perspective.
It was. My wife had a lot of concerns. I was the primary breadwinner as I was working full time and she was working part time. We had decent insurance through work. So this discussion with my wife was, can we handle this financially?
Right.
And how I answered that was really two different ways. One is, okay, here's the assets that we have, and here's how long they can last. And the other piece is, I felt confident that if I had to go back and get a job, I had the skills and experience to go and find a job, whether it's at GE, whether it's at another company. I really felt like I had a lot of portable skills, so employment really wasn't a concern. Um,
And what about your kids? So I'm thinking, that one, they probably love having you around on the one hand, and on the other hand, their friends might be saying, "Hey, man, what's happening with your dad?" I don't know what.
yeah, so my kids were a little unsure at first. My daughter was, I would say, almost as nervous as my wife was. Like, Dad, are we going to be okay? Like, am I still going to be able to go to college? Were a couple of those questions. I think a lot of it was my boys, especially, thought it was neat. We could go on scout campouts together. We could do things together. And over the first year, they really learned to appreciate not only the things that I could do with them, they actually saw the things that I was doing with my time and were really excited about seeing that and sharing that as well.
And you mentioned while you were explaining, your decision making process, a life threatening injury. What's that about, Shawn?
Yeah. So in 2002, I had lost my lower left leg due to an injury. It was a motor vehicle injury. So basically, I had a pretty severe life-threatening injury and ended up having my left leg amputated below the knee.
Okay, so that's a change, big big change. Were you, uh, I guess, were you hospitalized for a long period of time? Was it something that automatically, like one day, you have the accident, and the next day or the same day, the physician says, "Hey, Shawn, this is what needs to happen," or what was the progression like for you there? 2000.
So I was in the hospital for about 2 weeks. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of time. But for me, for a 29-year-old with a 1-year-old at home, it seemed like an eternity to be in the hospital. So when I got to the hospital from the ambulance, um, the leg was stabilized. So, the leg was still quote unquote attached. I had blood flow. The bone that was missing was replaced by a titanium rod. And so when I woke up from surgery, I could see my foot was there. I also saw a lot of injury to the muscles, to the bones. And really the biggest challenge was I lost a lot of nerve function. So I couldn't feel the bottom of my foot. I couldn't curl my toes. So at that point, it was really a decision. It was a decision of, do I want to try to salvage this limb that may or may not function and may take a lot of surgeries and time to recover? Or do I want to go through with an amputation, get out of the hospital, and get back on with my life? And, it's one of those decisions that seems difficult. I had a feeling that the physicians were leaning me towards amputation. But really, the deciding factor is I looked at my limb and saw how much I lost in terms of function. And then I looked at my son. My son was a year and a half. And I tried to think, well, how can I be the best father to him? And really, my goals were just to keep up with him. So when he started to walk, I wanted to be able to walk again. When he was riding a bike, I wanted to ride bikes with him. If he was going to be active, I didn't really think about scouts at the time, but if he was going to be in scouts, going hiking, canoeing, I wanted to be able to do that stuff with him. And so that's what really led to the decision of the amputation.
Okay. So post accident, the doctors were able to keep your leg attached with the titanium rod and whatever else they did, but then it became a matter of, am I just going to have it and not be able to use it, have function with it, or would I be better off? Yeah. Okay. You say that's not it's not that hard of a decision, but that seems like an incredibly hard decision, even if intellectually you're like, okay, this, I'm not going to have full use. Look at my muscles, look at my, all that. Still, so intellectually, okay, but pulling the trigger seems like a big deal, Shawn.
It, 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 it is a big deal depending on the context. So I'll share you my context and then share
Okay.
some of the context of other people that I've met with as I visit them. So, I was hit by a car. I saw the injury. I was basically laying in someone's driveway bleeding to death. I saw how bad the leg was injured, and I expected I was going to lose it anyway. I was fortunate that I was hit near a physician's house. So there was a couple of doctors on the scene right away. The local EMT station was like a couple hundred feet away, and I got a very cheap ride to a level 1 trauma center. So up until that point, I had felt very fortunate that I was alive, that I was healthy from the knee up. So in that context, it was a pretty easy decision. Things got challenging a lot later on. So again, it goes back to context. And the reason I share that is I meet with a lot of people that are going through amputation. And, I've met people that are young, healthy. They lose a couple of fingertips and it's just the end of the world. It's devastating to them. Then I meet someone that has been living with an injury for 10, 15 years, and they're constantly fighting infection. They're in a wheelchair. And when it comes to have an amputation to move on with their life, they're ecstatic. They can't wait to get rid of this limb.
Hmm.
So I think that my key takeaway, it's really your frame of reference that really, really gives you your perspective.
Okay, so by frame of reference, I read that as mindset. Is that what would you say? It's the same thing or different?
Um, I'd say there's a subtle difference between your mindset and frame of reference. I picture mindset as where do you think you're going, and frame of reference is where are you starting from. So I share my personal story. For the first 9 months, things were going great. It was more difficult for my wife than it was for me. I had lost a leg. She had lost a husband.
Mm.
Her children had almost lost a father. And it was very difficult for her. And so for me, things were fine until about 9 months in. I had went on a trip. It was like one of my early trips after my amputation. I was walking by then. I think I had a cane with me. And I saw 3 people in public that were amputees. Unfortunately, all 3 of them were panhandling. They were on the street, on the ground, begging for money. And so that became my frame of reference of this is what it's like to be an amputee. I didn't know any better. I didn't know anyone with amputation. Like I knew I could walk, but I didn't know, am I going to have all of these underlying health issues? How long is this prosthesis going to work for? What is my ability going to be like? I really had no idea where this was going. And so that was my frame of reference. And I actually became depressed because of that. And it really took a couple of years of working with therapists and getting experience and just understanding that, okay, I had this injury, but like most of the injuries, I can recover from it and I can go back to being myself. And I got to a point where 4 years after my injury, I wasn't Shawn the amputee. I was Shawn. People would talk about me. They wouldn't talk about my leg or my prosthesis.
Right.
They would talk about me as a person. And so once it became a whole person, I felt like I was fully recovered from my injury.
Shawn, that's so interesting because you talking about frame of reference. You had a frame of reference sort of out of the gate. It sounds like, and then you had this experience where you saw these panhandlers who happened to be amputees as well, and your frame of reference changed, maybe dramatically. It sounds like, and I wonder when you were talking about other people's frame of reference that you deal with now. Some people who are devastated by the loss of a few fingertips, for example, and others who are like, "Hey, life goes on. Let's just keep moving forward." It's just really interesting to me how your mind can um, not only change but change in such a dramatic way that you yourself are like you say, you go into depression after you felt for 9 months, you were like, okay, this happened. And it's really interesting to me because, it strikes me as a little bit like, and I don't mean to put these thoughts of mine into your experience. They probably aren't, but it seems a little bit like how we're always comparing ourselves to other people. And for some people that can be debilitating, right? Like, I'll never be as good as Shawn, or you name whoever it is. And for other people, it can be inspirational. Like, oh, I want to be more like Shawn, and here's what I have to do in order to get there. It's just, I don't know, just my.
Yes, I think comparing yourself to other people, can have a huge impact, and it can be detrimental because you only see them from the outside, and you see yourself from the inside. So someone can look at me and think, "Boy, I'm like healthy, I'm fit, I'm really active." Yet they don't see me when my nerve plane flares up, or I'm dealing with having to take care of my limb when I'm out camping and not having running water, or not dealing with tripping over stuff. So yeah, definitely comparing yourselves can be misleading because you don't know what the situation is. There's so many factors that go into that.
Yeah. What did you say? You can't see what's inside, right? What's something along those lines? Is that what you said, right?
Yep. Yeah. You can't see what's inside of other people. You're only looking at them from the outside, whereas your perspective of yourself from the inside looking out can be much different.
So I don't know if this happened in your neighborhood or happened at work or whatever, but I guess I just think, did you know the person that hit you?
I did not. So they were, it was a couple of miles from home. So I was just heading home from work on a Friday evening. I happened to take my motorcycle that day. And so, yeah, they were in the area, but I didn't know this person at all.
Okay. Because I was just thinking, I wasn't sure if you were walking or on a motorcycle. I wasn't sure exactly what, but yeah. I've had two other people on my show. And it's interesting you said how fortunate you were that a physician lived nearby, because Brian Bogert was on my show. He lost his arm by getting run over by a vehicle, but he was in like a Walmart parking lot or something, and there just happened to be a nurse coming out to go to her car who, essentially directed the scene, got someone to get a cooler, got someone to get ice, placed his arm in there, and of course the ambulance was coming and they were able to reattach his arm, and not perfect, but fortunately for him, it works. And then I had Sam Schmidt on my show. Sam was an IndyCar driver who was in a very tragic accident during qualifying and is a quadriplegic. But again, and like you, he's now an advocate for quadriplegics and spinal injury, folks. But like, again, he happened to be on a track that was, had a lot of medical help and a private, way to get him from there to the right facility in very quick time, which is similar to what happened to you and what happened to Brian. And there's so many people that I'm sure have had similar things happen who didn't have those other things, available to them, like help and like getting somewhere fast. And so and I think you sort of intimated this, but having to have something horrible happen, but be in a place where help is nearby is super fortunate. Super fortunate. So what about the when you made the decision, was your mindset then that, or your frame of reference, that you would get a prosthesis, or were you unsure? What were you? Because I know that's a big problem for a lot of people. Is you get the amputation, and maybe like these people you saw panhandling, they can't afford, or they can't get. I don't know what the process is, but what was your thinking about that? Where were were you when you made the decision on that part?
Yep. So at the time, I mean, looking back, I was pretty naive at the time. I would say clueless. Um, I was told I would be able to get a prosthesis and I would be able to walk. And, at that time, that was really the only resolution of the information I needed is, okay, will I be able to walk again? And that was sort of a binary yes or no question with a yes answer. Um, Looking back on it now, our mobility is not just a binary thing. There's different levels of mobility and different levels of being able to walk. Medicare actually has a scale that they use. It's a 5-point scale that measures your ability and helps you determine what type of prosthesis to get. So yeah, at the time I thought, okay, I'd be able to walk. I'd be able to have a quote unquote normal life. Didn't know like what pain would be like, what my ability would be like. Didn't know how often I would be able to wear the prosthesis, how functional I would be. But if I could raise a child, raise a family, spend time with them, that to me was the important factor at the time.
Okay. And what ended up being the process that you had to go through in order to get the appropriate prosthesis? And I don't know, is that a one and done thing, Shawn, or is it something that keeps changing over time?
It's a pretty complicated and convoluted process. So there's actually a lot of things you have to go through. There's about 6 or 7 steps, and I'll just try to summarize them. I mean, so first of all, you need to be healed. I had to go through several surgeries just to get my wound cleaned, remove any debris, remove any necrotic or dead tissue. It took a couple of days and several surgeries before the wound was actually sealed. This is actually, it's kind of morbid, but cool. So because I had a lot of soft tissue damage, I had like an open injury. There was open bone and skin that was missing. So what the doctors did is they took my muscles and they sort of wrapped my calf around the side of my leg. And then they harvested the skin from my foot that was amputated. Like, I'm not going to need this skin anymore. They actually took the skin and grafted or stapled it onto my limb. So I had a couple of months of recovery of just letting this new skin grow on my limb. So I had I had closing of the wound. I had a lot of recovery, physical therapy, lots of stretching, lots of exercises, lots of strength training, lots of endurance training with my arms. And I had a couple of delays due to the skin graft and the skin taking a while to, I'd say heal, but the skin literally had to grow from scratch. And then once that completed, then I got to the phase of getting fit for a prosthesis. And it's a very involved process where you go in to get measured. You have a doctor that actually writes for a prescription like they would write for medication. And then you have someone called a prosthetist who's, part clinician and part craftsperson. And they take this mold of your leg and then they make this temporary test sock to see how it fits. And does it check out? Is it comfortable? Is it the right alignment? And then they make another socket, which is the part that fits on your leg. And then you pick out a foot and you try to stand and then you try to balance and then you start walking. And once you get the prosthesis set up and designed, then you have to go through physical therapy again to learn to stand, to learn to balance, get up and down from the floor, get up from a chair, go up and down stairs. As my mom said, it's basically like watching her son learn to walk again. So it's a quite involved process.
And when you initially made the decision, did your physicians or your team think that the likelihood that you'd be able to get fitted and have a quote unquote normal life, be able to do all the things that you could do before or mostly, did they think that was a reasonable possibility, Shawn?
I wish I could answer that question. But that was so long ago. It's been 19 years.
Yeah.
Again, my headset was, well, I'm just going to recover from this and live a somewhat normal life with limitations, right? So there's people that have bad knees, bad ankles, but I'd be able to walk and probably bike. And so, I mean, to me, that seemed fine. Like that was a pretty normal life for most people, and typically what I was doing anyway. So it was good enough for me at the time.
Okay. And the the amount of time that it took from, the injury to where you went through all of that process to get fitted and get the right device, and then felt comfortable in it, working with it, living with it. How long was that, give or take?
It was roughly about 8 months from when I first had the injury to when I was walking back to work without a cane,
Okay.
traveling.
That sounds
Um,
really fast.
it well,
And
it actually happens faster. Some people it happens in 4 to 6 months. And granted, you're not going out doing 5 mile hikes at that point, but I was going to work. I could be employed. I could spend time with my family. I could do the things that really mattered to me. There was another milestone. There's actually a couple of milestones, but at least in this context, a major milestone was the 4 year milestone. And that was important because that's when I felt like I was fully recovered. I was off of medication, off of medication for the nerve pain, off of antidepressants. I had gotten a permanent prosthesis, which meant my leg was stable and I could wear it pretty much anywhere. And this funny thing happened. That's when I really noticed that people appreciated me and acknowledged me for who I am. And this really stuck out at a class reunion I went to. So if you imagine, I went to a high school, had a graduating class of about 75, and so we all know each other. And it's a small town, so look, we all know our families. So I went to this class reunion and had seen people, most of them for the first time since my amputation. And I noticed that not a single person even asked about my amputation. They didn't ask about my leg. They didn't ask to see my prosthesis. They just wanted to know about me as a person. And that was really a light bulb moment for me that, I fully recovered for this because I'm whole again. I'm me. I'm not a person with this thing. And it really helps me appreciate the notion of like disability and identity and why you would say that someone uses a wheelchair versus someone is confined to a wheelchair. I'm someone with an amputation. I'm not an amputee. Like I don't walk around with a hat that says I'm an amputee.
Sure.
It just happens to be one of the many things and experiences that have happened in my life.
I like that. Yeah. That's weird. It's as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, okay, how many times did I call you an amputee? Did I, and because people tend to label, right? That's just what you tend to do, or confine to a wheelchair instead of use a wheelchair. And I don't know if that comes out of the medical community at first, like you went to an insane asylum, you didn't have a mental health trauma, you were crazy or whatever, and we've sort of evolved to, hey, just, these are conditions that people have. They're not, doesn't define them as a person, which is kind of
Yep.
what you
Yeah.
were getting
I
at.
mean, so, you can say that I'm disabled or I have the parking tag to prove it. Right? I'm not completely disabled as I can work. But like when people look at me, they definitely don't see a disabled person. And either even other events that I've attended, I've seen people that are missing 4 limbs, right? No hands, no feet. And I've learned to appreciate that they're not a disabled person. They're an individual. Yeah, they have a lot of challenges and, some very extreme challenges. Yet they also have fulfilling aspects of their life and it is different. But to put a label on it, I think, is categorizing people, which isn't really how people are.
Okay. So let's get back to when you made the decision um, to leave GE Healthcare. And you told me that your 3 priorities were your your kids, um, volunteering, and personal development. So I'd like to get into all three of those and see how those priorities have sort of um, worked out for you, what they mean to you now, what you've done, because it's sort of like you decided not that you were going to early retire. That's not how I see it, and I don't think that's how you see it. You're basically looking at how am I going to reprioritize my life in order for me to feel successful in everything that I want to do.
Yep. Yeah. So when I reflected on those priorities, the answer was kind of obvious. The answer was focus on the things that helps me achieve all three. And so, I mean, really from the get-go, one of my priorities was to become a scout leader. Literally the day after my last day at GE, my younger son had crossed over into a Boy Scout troop. So here I have my two sons in the same Boy Scout troop. What a great way to spend time with them and do activities with them. And also a great opportunity to volunteer. And also a great opportunity to develop personally. There's definitely ways to develop as a leader in scouting. And I actually went to a pretty good leadership course towards the end of that first year in which she really focused on servant leadership and spent a lot of time reflecting and journaling, working with other adults with some really challenging leadership situations and role-playing situations. So yeah, scouting was one area where I focused all three. Another area was robotics. I spent about 2 years volunteering with my son's robotics team. And then I also explored a few other things as well that we can get into. But that's really where I started with scouting and robotics, and then really grew from there.
And the leadership training that you got as part of your scouting thing, can you dig us in a little deeper on? You said it was pretty extensive. So what? I'm curious because I'm always looking for ways to become a better leader and to help others become better leaders. What'd you go through? What happened?
Yeah. So I took this course called the Philmont Leadership Challenge. Philmont is a very well-known scouting ranch in New Mexico. It's like hundreds of thousands of acres. And the Leadership Challenge, it's probably the highest level of leadership course you can get as an adult in scouting. And it really focused on servant leadership. So it really focused on trying to answer, how can you become a leader that supports other people? How can you be someone that is appropriate for the people that you're serving? So it's not about me. It's not about what I can do. It's how can you be a leader that helps, coaches other people, develops other people, and has other people grow to capacities way beyond what you're capable of doing. So I'll give you one example. We did these simulations where you had to do first aid, and the rule is that you had to take turns playing different roles. And we had one leader that she was very experienced in first aid. She had led a troop of boys in this event where they were basically the first responders. And she could not but help to jump in every single simulation and do the activity. So she did it once. The first time she stood back, and within 30 seconds, she was jumping right in, doing the activity. The third time, it was about a minute before she jumped in, and someone said, really the purpose of this exercise isn't to treat the victim. It's really to be able to stand back, to observe, to learn how to coach and guide others in the way that they need in the situation. And so that was a profound change for her. It was pretty profound for me to see that in action. The other example is just thinking about your job as a leader is really not to help people get to where you are. It's to help people get to beyond where you are in your life as a leader. So it was a lot of reflection, a lot of journaling, as well as a lot of practical exercises. It was really just a wonderful experience, and really helped me develop a question that I would ask on a regular basis. So 5 times a day, I would ask this question: how can I best serve others right now?
And was that something that came out of it, or is that something you came up with on your own?
Yep, that was one of the things that came out of that. So he had to write down, what are we going to do to implement what we learned? How do we practically do this in our day-to-day lives? And so I wrote a bunch of notes. I had a couple of things. And that was one of the things I took away from that course is, here's my action. I'm going to ask this question. When I get up, every meal, at the evening, how can I best serve others right now?
I like that. The woman you described, sort of, when I was listening to you, I thought to myself, that's very common. That's like a competency paradox, right? I see what's happening. I know how to fix it. I'm going to fix it. And that's a lot of us, right? A lot of us, that we became leaders because we were competent in doing things. And so when you see something that you can resolve, we get a little hung up on our ability to resolve it rather than our ability to help others recognize it the way that we do and be able to solve it themselves, or maybe better than we do because we didn't, right? It's kind of like, that's a trap that a lot of us are in.
Yes, I catch myself doing that. I definitely got to my point in my career where I was due to competence. But then I've caught myself realizing, hey, I need to take a step back, and the solutions that others come up with are much better than what I could come up with, which is really servant leadership. And you really see this particularly in scouting. We have a lot of parents of 10-year-olds. They join Boy Scouting, they join the troop, and they're used to being like the den mother, the person that's right there correcting the behavior. And we try to teach the parents to step back. It's really the older scouts that should be setting the example. Myself as the scoutmaster, I'm the one that's coaching the older scouts on how to address behaviors. And then the parents are there to observe, to support, to be my eyes and ears. If they see anything, let me know. I'll let the scout leader know, or the oldest scout know, and they can really manage that. So it's really giving them a sense of ownership and building their competencies. That's why scouting is a 7-year program. Is sometimes it takes 7 years for a lot of youth to get there, but they do. And so again, that's just the magic and the power of servant leadership.
And where are your sons in the process now? Have they gotten to the Eagle Scout? That's the top, right? Or
Yep. Yep. My oldest son is 20. He is an Eagle Scout. So that was a very proud moment in our life for him to achieve that. My younger son is 2 steps away from being an Eagle Scout. He's in high school right now. He's well on his way. And yes, there were 2 boys. There was one other boy that was the same age as my son. And just to see them mature from, these first graders running around causing chaos to very, independent, young adults has been very impressive. I'm on these Facebook groups with college parents and just can't believe the questions these parents are asking of other parents. I'm thinking to myself, my son can figure this out. Like, he has the knowledge and the skills, and if he doesn't have the knowledge, he knows how to go find it.
Oh, so you're saying this is actual parents asking people to help them solve problems that are solvable. Okay.
Some parents are asking other parents how to solve these problems, and I'm thinking, well, my son has the skills to solve these. Even if he doesn't know the answer, he knows how to find the answer.
So, Shawn, one of the good things about doing Zoom podcasts is I get to see, the other person's environment, not like in the studio where people come to me and it's all about my stuff. And you've got a banner on your wall that says ROMP, R-O-M-P, Range of Motion Project, and it looks like it's signed by it looks like it has a lot of signatures on it. So I have to ask, what is ROMP and what's that all about?
Okay, so great question. Very relevant to my personal focus right now. So ROMP stands for Range of Motion Project. It's an international nonprofit that provides quality prosthetic care to underserved populations. So ROMP provides prostheses and more specifically prosthetic care to people in the U.S., Ecuador, and Guatemala. People that don't have access to prosthetic care, people that weren't as fortunate as I was to have health insurance, and not just insurance, it's just access. Medical providers that understand this and know how to help patients gain their mobility. So, boy, there's probably an hour-long podcast we can do just on my involvement with ROMP, but I'll try to give you the short story.
Okay.
And then you can tell me what you think is most interesting and relevant. So about 2 months after I stopped working and was into my career break, I asked my prosthetist if he had any ideas for volunteering, because that was my number 2 priority, seeing what's out there. And he said, well, yeah, he volunteered for this organization called ROMP. He went to this clinic in Guatemala. Never thought I would actually follow through on this. So I emailed ROMP and said, hey, I'm thinking about volunteering maybe in 5 or 6 months. And that day I got an email back that said, hey, Shawn, we have an opening in our clinic in Guatemala in 3 weeks. We'd love to see you down here. So in 3 weeks, I found myself in Guatemala at a prosthetic clinic volunteering and just fell in love with the organization. And it's not that just they're providing prosthetic care, it's the way they treat the individuals. We really respect people's human dignity, really treat people as an individual, try to build community. So I've been more and more involved with them over the past several years. I went from a volunteer to a fundraiser to an ambassador to a board member, and I'm currently president of the board. So that's the general picture, but this flag has a special story behind it. So when I was going to Guatemala, in parallel, I was planning this crazy trip, and I literally spun a globe to try to find what's the craziest place I can go to. Had thought I was going to go to the North Pole when I finally realized that I hadn't looked at the bottom of the globe. So I decided I'm going to go to Antarctica, and my goal was I was going to go camping in Antarctica. That was my big dream.
You were Shackleton.
Yeah, just an adventurer, and I do all this camping with scouts. I camp 20 or 30 nights a year, so I'm going to go camping in Antarctica. But there was this funny thing. They offered camping and kayaking and hiking and photography, but they also offered mountaineering, and I thought, that seemed kind of dangerous. I've got a prosthesis. I didn't know how well I would do. What if something breaks? So I was literally at the airport on my way to Guatemala, and I had just booked this trip to Antarctica for 6 months later. Had signed up for all the activities except for mountaineering. So that's in the back of my mind. And then I go to this ROMP clinic, and I'm meeting the executive director and the program officer and having this incredible experience. For the first time, I actually met peers, people that had gone through amputation before. The executive director was of a similar age, had almost the same amputation, a different cause, but left below the amputation. That's the first time I'd actually bonded with someone with a similar injury. So I'm going through this process, and on one of the days, the executive director stands up and he talks about their big fundraiser, this Climbing for ROMP event. And he shows all these amputees that are climbing this volcano in Ecuador. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe I could do that. And then he's talking about how big this event is. And he says, yes, we've had people climb in every continent except for Antarctica. And I had this light bulb moment. I thought, okay, this is my goal for the year. I'm going to go mountain climbing in Antarctica. And I actually did. It was a pretty incredible experience. I had a pretty significant fundraiser. A lot of friends and family were on board with that. So that flag was actually with me in Antarctica in 2017.
And there were that many people with you then? So it was a group of...
So the people that signed the flag were all people that had fundraised. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I went there as part of I call it a cruise. I mean, it's like a cruise. It's not quite a cruise ship. It's a little bit smaller, but there was about 120 passengers, all very adventure-minded folks from different parts of the world that all wanted to see Antarctica. For a lot of them, it was on their bucket list, or for a handful of them, all seven continents were on that bucket list. So that was just a very, intense and unique experience.
And was your wife with you, or anyone from
Um,
your family, or did you just go alone?
um, so my wife did not go with me. She had no interest in going to Antarctica. Um, Someone tried to convince her to talk me out of it just because it's so remote, and like you're days away from a hospital. There's a doctor on the ship, and that's about it.
Right.
My wife knew that she couldn't convince me to not go, and it was going to be this solo journey. But then my one day my dad calls me up out of the blue and says, "Hey, Shawn, is the room on the boat for me?"
Really?
And it's just so unlike my dad. My dad's a farmer, and he's been on the farm for most of his life, as a child, and then most of his adult life. You know, he has traveled, so he's been around. But he had had cancer a couple years prior, and he had told my mom that he really doesn't like to travel. Like he likes to see new things and explore things, but he had kind of had enough traveling, so that's why it was such a surprise for him to call me up and say, "Hey, is there room on the boat for me?"
Right.
So I got to go with my dad. It was an incredible experience to spend 18 days with your father, literally to the end of the earth in two new continents in South America. So we flew to South America and then took a boat across the Drake Passage to Antarctica.
Did he climb?
Yeah, he did.
Nice.
Yep. So he was in the more intermediate group. But yeah, he got the experience. He didn't get the full like blizzard whiteout experience that I got, but yeah, he kayaked for the first time. He wasn't sure about kayaking among icebergs, but we convinced him to go do that, and he got to enjoy as much of the experience as I did.
Hmm. That had to be awesome. So did you have like a base camp, or did you that you return to every evening, or did you keep making different? Give us an experience. What is it like doing that?
So most of the trip was on the ship. Antarctica has an incredible amount of environmental regulations. So we basically would only go on land for 4 to 6 hours at the most. And everything that we took on
Okay.
land, we had to bring back. Like you couldn't even bring a granola bar with you. And if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to bring that
You got to
back
bring
with
it
you
back.
as well. So the camping experience wasn't like roasting marshmallows and sitting by a campfire. It's you set up your sleeping bag at 11:30 at night, and 4:30 they're waking you up to get back on the boat.
Last year, I read a book. I can't remember the name of it right now, but this a guy who essentially hiked across Antarctica. And I remember a couple things about the book. One is that what you mentioned. He packed everything for this trip. It took him months, so he had everything in a sled that he pulled with him. Um, but everything had to come back out with him too. So he described everything that went into that. And was what also was interesting is there's a company in Wisconsin, in Palmyra, Wisconsin. The name is escaping me right now, but they made his protein, like his special protein bars that he ate to give him the calories he needed to get through the day. And he hiked for I don't know 14 hours a day. It's a really good book, and I'm sorry I'm spacing on the name, but you're in good company, I guess, is my point. So, um, and you had did I read that you had also done a triathlon, or you've done triathlons as well? So you have a little bit of confidence in your abilities.
Yeah, so after going to Antarctica, that was a huge confidence booster. I went from thinking of myself as disabled to, going through a normal life to going to Antarctica. And so I remember coming back from Antarctica. It was like 3 weeks later. I was at my mom and dad's thinking of, next year and what my goals are. And so, I mean, Christmas Eve, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I'm going to do a triathlon. And when I say do a triathlon, I hadn't run at all in 15 years. Like I was physically not able to run. I could jog for maybe 100 feet. Um, so when I signed up for the triathlon, I had no idea if I would even be able to run. Um, and I thought I could swim. I learned later I wasn't much of a swimmer. I had biked before, so I knew I could bike. And I figured, okay, I could at least get through this. So I signed up for the triathlon at the end of December. January 1st, 5 a.m., I went into the gym. I know it sounds cheesy, but I did it and I stuck with it. And I'll summarize where I got to at the end. At the end of the whole experience, I was really successful. Actually, I beat my goal time by about 15 minutes. I actually finished faster than half the people in the course. And for my age and gender group, I finished 19 out of 30, which, everyone else had 2 legs. A lot of the people had done triathlons before. It was my first one. So I finished that experience and I came to the conclusion that I'm not disabled. I think of my abilities and the medical care that I have and the incredible team that I had supporting me. I listed about 20 people that helped me get to the point where I could be a better swimmer, where I could transition from swimming to walking on the beach to putting in another leg to go biking and then getting a running leg and learning to run after not running at all for 15 years. So yeah, after that point, I convinced myself I am really not disabled. I'm not only recovered from my injury, I'm actually thriving.
That's phenomenal. And that's so you do have different prosthetics for the different parts. So you swim with one, bike with one, run with one, or is there one of them the same on the swim?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting realm when you dig into it. So for biking, I have my normal everyday walking leg for biking. I have a couple of modifications that I've made, but they're fairly minor. For running, I have a running blade, so it's a special foot that basically it provides a vertical motion. So you've probably seen them on TV, the running blades. Like they're really bouncy and they're good. They're not great. They're bad for walking, but great for running and jumping. And then for swimming, I had actually built myself a swimming prosthesis to go scuba diving. And this was like early on in 2004. But then I realized after going to a para-triathlon camp that you're actually not allowed to use the prosthesis when you're swimming following para-triathlon rules. So I thought, you know what? I'll just try this. I'll just learn to swim without a prosthesis. And I learned for me, it really doesn't make a difference. Swimming is mostly your arms anyway. And so I just kick my legs, whether I'm wearing a prosthesis or not, it doesn't make much of a difference.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. Um, I remember a friend of mine who ran or participated in multiple triathlons and at a high level. It told me the story once of being passed by an individual who had a running prosthetic like you described, and he said, I'm running, and he's like, and then I hear this, I hear this behind me, and it's getting closer and closer and closer, and all, and then the guy runs past him, and he's like, well, and he was very like he thought that was the coolest thing. Like it wasn't like he was like, oh man, he was just like, that's really cool that someone can participate at this level, and run past me. He thought it was really neat. So
Yeah,
congratulations.
I actually had that experience. And, while I could take credit for it, I really have to give credit to my team for this. So you think I had not run at all. I actually got my running blade maybe 4 months prior to the race. And at that point, I could only run a mile at a time. before my knees were sore. But on the running course, I was passing people, and it truly wasn't me, because when I had two legs, I was a terrible runner. I was a terrible runner in high school on my cross country team. But I went through a lot of physical therapy, a couple of running clinics and para-triathlon camps, a physical therapist. So yeah, here I am. I'm doing this triathlon, and everyone is getting off their bikes and they're like cramping over and really sore, and they're barely moving. Well, I get off my bike and I'm feeling great. I had done all the right things, had done all the right training. So I'm running through the gates thinking, why are these people running so slow? Like, is this just etiquette to kind of like walk or go slow through the gates? And the gates I get out of the gates, and I'm like, well, the heck with it. I'm just going to start running. And I just start going past people. And that, again, that was the training. And I had done a prior practice run when I had gotten off the bike. I almost fell over. I couldn't even sit on a chair. I was cramped up and so sore. But through the training and through the coaching, it really helped me be able to transition from the bike to running. And that's what really helped my time in that race.
Well, Shawn, this has been so inspiring and more than inspiring, just flat out interesting to have you take us through a partial journey of your experiences. I know there's a lot more. You intimated that you could go an hour just talking about ROMP. I guess I'm also impressed by your definition of success and how you've defined success in your life, because those are the stories that I'm trying to share, and not just success in business or just success in, as a physician or a philanthropist or whatever. I'm looking for people who are defining success and the way they want it and are actually making it happen, because those are the lessons that I think resonate with me for sure, and with most people who want to be the best that they can be doing what they want to do. So as we end here, I guess I just ask, your kids are growing up. They were one of your priorities, and while they will always be a priority when they're not around as much, they become their own, natural for them to become their own people. What are you thinking about for your priorities going forward?
Well, that's a great question, and something that I struggle with every day is what's next. Each year, it's what's the next thing. I still want to maintain my relationship with my kids, and you talked about success. I was thinking you were going to ask me what's my most important success, and while the triathlon is up there, while some volunteering is up there, I just want to add that my most successful accomplishment is that my kids hug me when we say goodbye. And that was actually something that I worked on, to condition my kids to know that when I say goodbye to them, I care for them, and I'm going to give them affection and say goodbye to them, because you never know when it's going to be the last hug goodbye.
Right.
So my kids are still around, and my daughter is looking at what to do after graduation, after colleges. And my son is a freshman. So to me, there's really two things that I would say would be success next to my life. One is, again, for my kids, making sure they find their purpose. As my son graduates college, as my daughter graduates high school, as my son, is now maturing, will be driving soon, helping them find some purpose, some passions, a calling in their life. In terms of volunteering, I'm really focusing on roles, both in scouting as well as with the Range in Motion project. I'm trying to think of how do I move beyond trying to impart my competencies to how do I build the right organization that can survive whether I'm there or not, and an organization that can thrive whether I'm there or not. So I'm looking at leadership. Yep, servant leadership.
Yeah.
Which I learned as part of my personal development.
Oh, that's wonderful. Shawn, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did, and I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing with me and with all of us. It's been a lot of fun.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. I enjoy reflecting on a regular basis, and this has really helped me reflect in my life and think about what's next as well. So yes, I appreciate you hosting me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.